So if in the previous video we were looking at applications, this video we'll be looking at functions. So this really, I would say, is the door to your bread and butter of the Lambda service. So on the functions tab, as you can see here. Oh, before that, fun fact, you can actually close the left pane and then open it back by clicking the hamburger icon. So there we go. So if you are ever fighting for more space on a smaller screen, you're free to just minimize this and expand it again whenever needed. But for this video or this tutorial in general, I'll try to keep the left pane extended or expanded. So, you can always refer to it as reference. All right, so moving on to the functions overview. So that's really what this video is about. So on the functions tab or section over here, you can see right away that I have 10 functions. So if you have never created a function, you just see, nothing here. It should say 0 over here. But something that I would like you to know, as the number of functions grows, remember that there's some powerful search capability here that you can make use of. For example, function name, you can have equal, does not equal, contains, and even does not contain. So I think these two are pretty advanced. So never worry about having too many functions. As long as you name them systematically, you should be able to find the function that you want. Okay, so of course you have the refresh button here. So if ever you've created a function, but for some reason it's not reflected here, you may want to refresh this page, and it says here that it was last fetched now. All right, so this is pretty much, I would say, updated every 10 seconds, if I'm not mistaken, around that. So that's pretty interesting. There we go. And of course, if you want to, I'm going to assume that you haven't created a function yet. So the first thing you want to do is go to create function in order to create one, of course, right? So right away, right, you can see this this page over here, and you do have 4 methods, right? 4 options to go for when it comes to creating a function, starting with authoring from scratch. You can start with a simple hello world example. Yes, they say it's from scratch, but really you'll be given a very, very minimal template, a hello world template to get started with. So it's not too bad actually for learning still. You also have the option to use a blueprint. And if you do go with this option, you need to, choose a blueprint to start with. You also have more advanced options such as container image. So if you are fond of Docker and you have a container image to deploy, you're free to use this. And also, you have things like serverless app repository, which again needs you to choose a repository to go for. So for this video, I'll focus on 2 things, author from scratch and use a blueprint. So let's first see author from scratch. Okay, and for this video also I'll be using Python just because I think, it's, syntax wise, it's very intuitive. And even if you haven't learned coding by chance, hopefully it will still make sense to you. And if you don't know how to code yet, I highly suggest you learn at least the basics. For example, pick up a programming language, be it Python, Node, JavaScript, just pick up something simple, learn your functions at the very least, variables, data types, functions, and then come back here and I think it'll make a lot more sense. Otherwise, if you just want to know like how it works, then you can just go on. All right, so let's go to the basic information tab here. So it says here, okay, enter a name that describes the purpose of your function. Really, you can just type in, any name that you wish, as long as it's unique within your account, right? Within your account. And if I'm not mistaken, within your region too. So you may want to check that, double check that. But yeah, I'm just going to do, I'm just going to type a function name here. So I'm going to say here, AWS Lambda tutorial. And then runtime, I'll go with Python, like I mentioned. Generally, you want to go with, a version that's the latest, simply because, sometimes AWS may say, oh, right, this version has reached end of life support, or they no longer support it. So in this case, I think Node.js 12, interestingly, reached end of life. So yeah, do take note of that. I try to go with the latest one. I think it's just good practice. But of course, if your code requires a certain version, you can stick with that. And as for architecture, this would be for the CPU, I believe. So typically there are two architectures when it comes to CPU. You have x86 and ARM64. So, ARM64, I would say, has taken the world by storm. I think the past few years, I think AMD has adopted it. Apple has adopted it. But, let's go with x86 for this example. If you want ARM, go ahead. Yeah, x86 is just a more, I would say, common architecture still compared to ARM64. Permissions, by default, Lambda will create an execution role with permissions to upload logs to CloudWatch. So if you don't know yet, CloudWatch is a AWS service where you can actually, see the logs for any of your service, for example, Lambda, right? Because Lambda, in order to troubleshoot Lambda or your code, you would need to see the logs for your code. So that's, something that you absolutely need. You can customize this default role later when adding triggers. Okay. So really when it comes to permissions, I would say this may need a whole new tutorial. But generally you can think of execution role here as, giving permissions to an AWS service. So in this case, we're, creating a new role with basic Lambda permissions, meaning, all right, let's give this Lambda function some basic permissions, including uploading logs to CloudWatch. So I can troubleshoot, I can print things out. I can troubleshoot my Lambda function. So there's going to be a whole playlist on IAM, which is identity and access management. So that's where, I'm going to explain more in depth about, permissions, fine-grained access and all that. But otherwise, for this video, just know that it's best practice to go with a new role with basic Lambda permissions, and then you can then add on permissions as required by your Lambda function. Okay, so let's go with create a new role with basic Lambda permissions. Remember that role creation might take a few minutes, so just in case your Lambda is not printing logs to CloudWatch yet, know that you may want to wait for a few minutes. Okay, so it says here that the Lambda will create an execution role with this name. Okay, so I'm just going to acknowledge that. With permission to upload logs, that's great. I'll be able to, print stuff and, observe my logs on CloudWatch. And let's have a look at advanced settings. So really, we won't talk about these yet. As mentioned in the previous video, the function URL feature is pretty new. We'll talk about this eventually, so stay tuned for that. So I'm just going to create a function here, and it should take a few seconds before I'm redirected to a new page, I believe. So let's see what we have after this. And there we go. So I was right. So you can see a new page here. So under functions, you would actually go to your function that you just created, in this case, AWS Lambda tutorial. Again, you can name it whatever you want. And boom, right? You have a new page over here. And this is the bread and butter that I was mentioning earlier. So I'm going to get into this, into an overview of this whole page in another video. But basically, this is the page that you want to get used to. All these tabs over here: test, monitor, configuration, aliases, and versions. This is crucial, to really, getting good at AWS Lambda and, making taking full advantage of it. So, yep, I think that's pretty much it for Author from scratch. We'll talk about using a blueprint in the next video.